Shalom and welcome back. And, well, you know, if there is any time to say that there's a lot of distress going on, it's definitely in the world that we live in today. It's crazy when you can look at something that's historically taking place right now at this very moment, and has never existed in American history. And the volatileness of everything that's happened is to the point where it's so extreme. The question that all you can think of is what will be the catalyst that will enter everything that we're seeing right now to blowing up in our faces in a way we could have never have desired to see. Because it's very obvious that the way the train is going, it's not going to stop. And the way everything is moving, it's only going to escalate. It's not going to de-escalate. And, Mashiach Yosha warned us and said that, in the end days, we will hear of wars and rumors of wars. And, when we see stuff happening like we see in today's world, and we see how the world has become so unstable, the spiritual, complete depravity of people that we see, and the mentality of how people are functioning, it's gone to a point where insanity is becoming more normal than the actual attitude of functioning with normalcy. And it really grieves me to see this, and I'm sure it grieves you to see it as well. And it's hard knowing the fact that things in today's world are not going to be the same. And I don't like this as much as you don't like it. What I assume you don't like it. It's just unbelievable how much has changed and how much has transpired within just 20 years of my own life. You never would have told me 20 years ago that things would be so severely crazy as they are today. And this only expresses to us our need to really sincerely look at the reality of how spiritually dark this world's become. The Torah teaches us that before there's any physicality, there's always a spirituality that goes forth. And before there is a manifestation that is physical, there's always a presentation of the things going on that takes place that is very diabolical. And I think we've gone past the part where things are just manifesting in a diabolical / codified format of life, where now we're seeing the manifestation of that taking place. And this is where it becomes really hard, because there's a lot of points that we have to portray and look at and ask ourselves, are we really getting ready? If there's one thing I could say is I have nothing to do with politics whatsoever. The world functions the way the world functions because of what the world has put forth its arm and hand towards. And you look at the sages and stuff, and they had to watch everything as it unfolded, seeing the dynamic of what was going to be taking place in their generation, and to understand how to respond to it. And we have to be very careful to respond to it. If there is a time for wisdom, this is the time. If there's a time for understanding on what to do, this is the time. Because things are changing. They're changing at a rapid rate that is affecting all of us. There's so much push and drive towards insanity that it's just like Isaiah said when he got to the point where he saw it in his time period. And this is the thing we have to think about. You know, when the prophets talked about what they dealt with, they were describing the complete fullness of what they saw at their time period. What was the state of the people when Isaiah said, you know, truth has been cast to the street. It's trampled on. Nobody cares. How bad was it? It was very bad. Extremely bad. It was so bad that it was the mentality that the common people, the secular, the non-godly people went from an extreme of just the ungodliness of what they saw to this extreme escalation that shocked and baffled the people, because they look at them and they think, I don't understand how people can't be reasoned with. I don't understand why there's such a refusal to acknowledge anything that is truth. I mean, you could see the news media today. Look at all the news. What do you see on the news? All over the place. It's insane. It's just like there's just this no desire whatsoever to even focus on any aspect of truth. And it's just mudslinging to the nth degree that it's scary when you see people get to that point, because all you can say is that's some serious stuff going on right now. And how it's going to affect us as a whole, you better get your boots strapped on. You better get ready, because things are changing. And the more it changes, the more severe it's getting. And we have to do everything to observe the Torah and keep it and follow it with our heart, soul, mind, and strength. And, you know, it's such a mind-blowing moment. I cannot understand with the insanity and why the insanity just wants to go in the direction it does. But that's the mystery of iniquity. That's the shock. Why does it want to drive itself down to the pit? It cannot be understood, because it's not something that has a logic. It's insanity. It's crazy. And all we can do is stand up and do the right things and raise up our children in the way that we need to go. They're going to be affected. They're going to be hit against. They're going to have the world pull at them in ways that probably didn't even pull at us, to the point because of how crazy everything's becoming. But we have to understand the fact of seeking God's word first and his righteousness is all that matters. This world doesn't want to follow after truth. This world wants to follow after errors. This world wants to follow after wrong, after lies, after what's easy. It doesn't want to follow after the path of righteousness. That should already be known and understood, because the world doesn't have a covenant with God. It doesn't. And we need to observe the commandments, and we need to follow the statutes. And we need to encourage everybody that we can to do the same. There's a war for our families, there's a war for our communities, and there's a war for the world. And the most hardest part is knowing that few there be that find it. That's the hardest part, because that shows it's going to be a very lonely path in many ways. And we have to work out our salvation through fear and trembling, as Paul said. And we need to rise up and stand up to fight against the perversions of the world, the insanity of the world, and hold of the fact of the things that we need to do and to follow. It's just, my mind can't even, I can't believe how fast everything's become so crazy. And how much everything's become so intense. I mean, if you lived here in America watching the news, but you would look outside, you would think in many places you live, it's quiet, it's calm, but then you look and you see what's really going on. And you're like shaking your head thinking, this is just nuts, this is just nuts. This is crazy. And the question goes in to say is, how long until it blows up? At what point does it become a complete attitude of just, war? That's the question. That is the question that you have to ask, because with the amount of hatred and the amount of just absolute non-willingness to work and work together. This is the thing when you have to see this and stuff. This is when you see the insanity hit the fan and everything just splatters all over the place. Because we're at a point where it's not going to stop. It's not going to turn itself. It is made a full-blown steamed engine chugging down that railroad train. And it's like the handle's broken off. And now it's just what becomes the point of it? How bad is this going to become? To what extent is this going to carry on to? And all you can say is this really shows how much the enemy is really fighting to try to get this world to fall apart. That's the key thing. When you look at the Torah, and the Torah teaches us about Noah, what made the time of Noah so severe and so wicked? The enemy fought so vehement to get people to fall apart. That is what happened. And when people fall apart and people fall down and people start crumbling, then everything else starts to just progress. And this is why it's so important for us to keep our head straight, to keep our eyes focused on the truth and to walk in the ways of truth. You might have kids who struggle with reading the scriptures. You got to be the one reading it to them. You got to be the one constantly sharing the truth until finally it bears fruit to the point where that torch inside of them is burning bright. Because it is a battle for the soul. It's the battle for the mind. It's the battle for the life. And we have to defend and fight against everything. It's just like the Constitution. I will defend the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic. We have to look at our families that way. I will defend my family from all enemies, foreign and domestic. We have to defend. We have to fight. It's really hard. And it's a battle that we're not going to stop. We're going to have to keep fighting. And I want you just to think about this and to put this into thought, food of thought, thinking, ideas. When I think about, for example, how much confusion is come upon our understanding of the New Testament, it's just because of how it's taught. It's because of how people have gone about describing their version and understanding of it. You find people who, look at the New Testament as a book of just, well, Jesus saved me and I don't have to keep the law anymore. And all I need to do is just keep, looking at the things of what Jesus did and just have this faith and belief that somehow that, I don't need to keep the commandments and statutes. I'm free from these things. big, humongous thing. I mean, millions of people stuck in this doctrine. And then there's the reality. Mashiach Yehoshua came to teach us how to live and died to set us free from the bondage of our own sins so that we would become sons of God, and so that our believing on him, Mashiach Yehoshua, and our obedience to God's commandments, that God sees us when we obey him as his children. He sees us when we obey him as having fear of his words and having faith, and that his words are going to come about as he spoke. And this is so vitally important because this is what's been lost. And it's crazy because it's like, if you look in today's world and stuff, how many people don't want to follow the laws, how much they want to break and violate them. I mean, look at the fact of how people have spoken about the president, for example. They are so nasty, they're so degrading. There's no fear of authority whatsoever. It seems that it's just completely gone out the window. The truth of people have the freedom of speech doesn't mean they have this ability to take what they think is okay and to use it as their form of spitting out their hatred and anger. It doesn't matter who the president is, doesn't matter who the people are that are in the Congress or the representatives of Senate. What matters is showing proper respect for every single person in authority. Not even people in authority show that to each other. And this is a lot of the stuff that's gone downhill. I'm allowed to not agree with things in authority. I'm allowed to not agree with the things that people do that are in authority. But the Bible doesn't teach us to disrespect them, because God has placed them, despite no matter what anybody wants to think, he's placed them in that position for a reason. He allowed them to be put in that position for a reason. And, there's a lot of nasty people out there in the Democratic Party that say some really bad things. But our job as believers is to pray for them to see the things they need to change. Is to pray for them to do teshuvah. And our job is not to sit here and go around and trying to create nasty comments about people in authority, but rather having respect for the authority that they have been given, and praying that God would guide and God would turn their heart away from things that are wrong. And, this is the key thing we see all throughout the Brit Chadashah. What did Mashiach teach us in how we were to teach people that were in authority? Respect them and show them the honor that they have. And there's nothing wrong about disagreeing with what they teach or with what they said, but it's how you go about the attitude of disagreeing and how you go about the attitude of how you treat the people in the authority position. Because love conquers over anything that is hateful. But hateful will never conquer over things. Hateful will only fall apart and has no power as compared to love. The Bible says that the thousands of the generations of those who love me. But he says to the thousand, singularly, to those who fear him. Therefore, we learn from the Torah that love has more power than hate, that love has more power than fear. And we are to live with love. And the reason why love diminishes is because the lawlessness in the hearts of people grow. And as lawlessness increases, the love grows cold. Because lawlessness tells you to act upon how you feel, act upon how you emotionally look at things, and not how you ought to look at things from the perspective of love and mercy. And it's very hard when we live in a time period. And to those people whoever they are, that's in a position that expresses attitudes of hatred, that expresses attitudes that creates division. And, what kind of division is there? Well, there's nothing wrong with creating division unless it's wrongfully done. And this is what we learn from the scriptures. That division is created only done rightfully when you're exposing the wrongs that are being done at a time period and in a position where things need to be fixed. But when you create division by which you're trying to change the good and trying to alter it to become evil, that is when it is wrong. So we see so many times people today in this world where if you speak the truth about what the Torah says and people look at you as being divisive, it's because they themselves don't know what division looks like. And they don't know what absolute divisiveness looks like because they're deceived. But when we read the scriptures and we study them, we learn the fact that the vision that is biblical and sound and beautiful is the division of breaking apart of the lie in order for people to see the path of truth. That is what brings peace, because the truth is what sets us free. Why would any of us want to be under lies and deceptions? Why would any of us want to be under the guise of falsehoods? The logic says that doesn't make any sense. What we want to be is under the banner of truth. We want to be under the knowledge and understanding of righteous truth. What is the reality? What is the truth of the situation? And this is what's hard, because we live in a time period where people want to expose what they think is truth, but it's really they want to present the lie in order to stop the exposure of the lies so that the people can know the truth. And it's disgusting. This is why you see in the news media all the things you see today. They're trying to make up stories that don't exist. They're trying to make up scenarios that aren't true. That is an antichrist system. That is exactly what the lawless system is going to look like. And that's just an infancy of it. That's what's disgusting. The enemy wants to kill, steal, and destroy. He wants to blot out the truth from being seen. But look at what's going on today. When you have people that have an agenda and all they want to do is present their agenda so that they can make you believe in things, what do you have? You have a destructive force. Mashiach Yosha told us, he said, that the kingdom of God has been taken by force. And he tells us that those who are wicked and evil take the kingdom by force. And you realize that's how dictatorships are created, is the attitude of forcing the people to accept what they want. Where the attitude of righteousness is letting people think for themselves and to realize why something's wrong and what is right. And why the wrong is wrong and why the right is right. And that is what most people don't want to hear. They don't want to hear because it's difficult. It takes time. You have to investigate it. You have to search it out. And you have to truly understand why such and such is the case. But the Bible tells us, through Jesus' words, few there be that find it. And difficult is the way. Because few people want to know truth. And few people want to adhere to truth. That's why we're seeing our generation falling apart like it is. It's because we're becoming more and more where people don't want truth. People want to believe in lies. And the more that becomes the norm, the more judgment becomes the end result of all of that garbage. And this is why we need to stand and just teach our children to do what's right. Because the Bible tells us that God protects those who fear God. God tells us he delivers those who obey him out of the hands of the wicked. And he gives grace and mercy to those who obey his voice. And this is why it's important that no matter what everybody else says, we need to do what's right. And, it's really grievous to see how everything has been and how everything's been growing more and more exceedingly evil, to the point where you feel like, I want to stop this train. I want to get off this train. I don't want to go where this train's heading. I have no desire for the garbage that this train is heading towards. And we need to do what's right. We need to keep the commandments and statutes. We need to follow the Torah. So I want you to just keep these things in mind as we go through today in our learning, and how we focus upon the reality of the path of righteousness and how to oppose the path of evil, and how to stand up and to keep the Torah, and to remember the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but the pulling down of strongholds and mighty places, and destroying the powers of the principalities and powers of the air. And it's by standing up and doing what's right. Baruch Hanashah says in Matthew 15, verse 1, Az ba'u el Yoshua, then Yoshua came, HaSofrim HaParashim Asher Me'Yushalayim, and the scribes and the Pharisees who were from Jerusalem. V'amru, and they said, Madua Talmidecha, why is it your Talmidim, Ovrim, are crossing over, which is meaning violating, Et Chochot HaZiknim. So, in your Bibles, the Greek word you're going to find is pardosis. And that Greek word is actually a very important word, because it's translated as traditions. Now, traditions is a horrible word, because in English, the word tradition would literally mean like something that is just man-made, okay? But the problem with this is the same word pardosis is used in other passages where Paul talks about the keeping of the pardosis. And so, why is it a horrible translation? Well, the Greek doesn't mean a translation, okay? And or not a translation, but a tradition. The Greek refers to it, and you got to remember, they're trying to take a Hebrew concept and they're trying to translate it into Greek when they actually made the Greek translation of the New Testament. They're trying to make the context of what is this word. Now, like I said, it's been horribly translated tradition, whereas the word itself means to take a law and to interpret it based upon this written document. So in this passage, what it is the Pharisees are frustrated that the doctrine that they believed was true, the belief that they believed was true based upon their interpretation of the Torah, was that you were to wash your hands before you ate food. So what do they say? They said, Ki einam rochatzin, for none of them are washing, et yadehem, their hands, ba'achlam, when they're eating lechem, bread. Okay? So, all of the Talmidim followed Mashiach Yehoshua's actual action. The Bible tells us in another book of the four Gospels that it was Mashiach Yehoshua and actually initiated the not washing of hands. And when the Talmidim saw this, they realized they needed to follow what it was that he was teaching them. And so when they stopped and did not wash hands, the Pharisees were upset, and so they saw that everyone was caught up in doing what Mashiach Yehoshua taught. And so for them, they were disturbed and bothered by it. That's why they brought up the question. But let's listen to the answer. V'yan v'yamer lehem, and he answered and he said to them, Madua gam batem avrim et mitzvat Elohim. Why is it you cross over, violate the commandment of God. Ba'al chochechem, on behalf of your interpretations. You see the word pardosis once again is used here again. But this word, like I said, it means the interpretation and belief of a written book. So the sages, the Pharisees and the scribes, they thought that their interpretation of how they viewed the Torah was correct. Now, I know if you stop and think for a second here, how come Mashiach Yehoshua didn't just respond to them? Many people would naturally think when a person doesn't respond that he's deviating from responding. But the answer here is, let's think about what happened. If a person was trying to deviate from answering a person's initial question, typically we think of this person's lying and wants to, instead of admit to the fault, he wants to change the subject. But the problem here is he wasn't. So what was he doing? Why would he choose to sit there and accuse them of what it was that they were doing and not respond to what it is that he was doing? Because, like I said, normally times we think, if I said, why are you doing such and such? And you said, why are you doing such and such? Immediately we think as people, you're trying to change the subject and point the angle back at me, when really and stuff, you're the one who needs to answer the question. That's how we think, right? The problem is when you're right for what you did, do you have to answer that question? You don't. So, what was he doing? He was arguing with them because they dared to challenge him in trying to say he was at fault. So it's kind of like the thing where it's like, if you pull out your sword at me, but you realize you're wrong, well, we have the right to pull out our sword at you and tell you you're wrong. Tit for tat. And that's exactly how we can see this, is he pointed out exactly that they had violated and done wrong things when they had not been doing anything to point out that he violated anything, because he didn't. So what does he say here? He says, Elohim tziva le'amor, God commands, saying, Kaved et avicha ve'et imecha, honor your father and your mother. Makalel avi ve'et imo, whoever curses his father and mother, mot yumat, shall surely be put to death. V'atem omrim, but you say, Amar, la'avi la'imo, to his father, to mother, karban. It's a korban. V'kol asher techena mimeni, anything that would become from me. Right? So, what is he trying to say? He's pointing out the fact that these guys who were sages were actually teaching their Talmudim to actually commit the violation of not honoring your father and your mother, right? And since they were not honoring their father and their mother by these actual interpretational lies, which means they were actually elevating the sages over their parents, that became a huge sin, because the parents, according to the Torah, deserve to be honored. And because these people were chastising their children, saying, no, this is not what the Torah says, but these kids were acting like, who do you think you are? My rabbi said such and such. These sages say such and such. Well, the parents were right in telling the children that there is no halakha in the Torah that requires us to wash our hands before we eat. This was a misinterpretation of the sages, and their interpretation was wrong, and it created an imbalance of obedience to Torah. And by doing so, it made the people who were the sages to be honored and the Torah to be dishonored. And this is why Mashiach Yehoshua condemned them for this evil act. Lechen, therefore, he says, Hu enenu kaved, he does not honor et avi, his father, ve'et imon, his mother, ve'tefaru et davar Elohim, and he's literally overturned or blotted out or made void the words of God. Lama'an chuchotechem, in order for your interpretation. You see, it's an important thing to understand the fact that when it comes to being a parent, that many times kids kind of have this retarded understanding where they think, my parent doesn't know what he's talking about. These guys are sages. They're wise. I'm going to believe that what they're saying is true. But they don't understand why their parent has the understanding that they have, and that their parent actually knows the truth and the things that he's trying to tell their children. And so what happens is the children follow, not their parents, they end up following the lies. So what does he say? Chanafim, hypocrites, hetiv niva elechem. It is well prophesied concerning you. So what do you mean by hypocrites? It's a very important statement. Hypocrites. What is a hypocrite? It's a person who knows that when he's being corrected, that what's being said is right. But when being corrected, they acknowledge it as not accepting it, and therefore they deny the acceptance of what's being said. That is what a hypocrite is. So here, in this passage,